Welcome to the Movement series, where we explore one book, one chapter at a time to ignite fresh vision for disciple-making movements around the world. I'm Isa, and this season, we're walking through Spent Matches by Roy Moran, a bold call to rethink church and re-engage the mission of Jesus in a radically practical way. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey, this series will challenge and inspire you to step into the movement God is already stirring. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Movement series.
Glad to be here.
In these deep dives, we really try to unpack some challenging ideas, surprising insights from books that talk about transformation. And today, we're turning our attention to Chapter 2 of Roy Moran's book, Spent Matches.
Yeah, and that chapter, it's got, quote the title, Putting the Great Back into Jesus' Last Command.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's bold, like you said. Suggests maybe we've missed something important.
Exactly, that something's been lost along the way.
So our mission today, really, is to wrestle with the author's challenge to a lot of how we usually think about Jesus' final instructions, right before he ascended.
The Great Commission, Matthew 28.
Precisely. What did he really mean? And importantly, what does that look like for you listening right now?
It's a pretty potent reevaluation, isn't it? Taking what many see as the foundational command for followers of Christ and saying, maybe we've misunderstood it.
Or diluted it somehow.
Right. And that, the author argues, affects how we live, how we measure success. It definitely pushes you to take a fresh look, maybe an uncomfortable one.
Okay, let's dive in then. It all revolves around Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20. The Great Commission. For anyone serious about faith, these words are just pivotal.
Yeah.
Why does the author see this command as so universally significant?
Well, he sees it as the essential marching orders for everyone, and he tackles this right away. He's adamant this wasn't just for the handful of people physically there with Jesus.
Not just the apostles.
Not at all. He argues it's a command for all followers of Christ. Everywhere, throughout history. So the foundation is this isn't a specialist task. It's for everybody.
Okay, that makes sense. But then he gets into the language, and this is where, it started to challenge my assumptions. He looks at the word we usually translate as go. He says in the original Greek, it's not really a sharp command like go. It's more like what does he call it? A verbal noun?
Yeah, a participle, technically, suggesting something more like as you are going or simply having gone.
Right, as you go.
Yeah.
Why does that little linguistic detail matter so much to you?
Because it completely flips the script on how you think about mission. If it's go, maybe you think you need a special call, a plane ticket, a destination.
Pack your bags, head out.
Exactly. But as you go, that suggests something else entirely.
Like what?
Like the mission isn't some extra activity you schedule into your life. It's embedded. It's already part of the rhythm of your everyday life as a believer.
So just living.
Pretty much. As you go to work, run errands, talk to neighbors, raise your kids, you're already in the place of mission. It makes you ask, doesn't it? Have you maybe compartmentalized mission as something...
Yeah, like a specific trip or event.
When maybe the author's saying, no, you're already there, just by living your life as a follower.
Wow. Okay, that is a significant reframe. So if the mission is as you go in your normal life, that has to change how you do it too, right? And this leads him to critique some common practices. He talks about persuasion evangelism. He even suggests it's hard to find Jesus himself primarily using that method. What's he getting at there?
Well, he's looking at things that are pretty familiar to many of us, like the altar call.
Right.
Which he connects historically to figures like Charles Finney, back in the 19th century, or even the common practice of leading someone in a sinner's prayer. He isn't saying these things are inherently bad or that the concepts behind them are unbiblical, but he argues they're relatively recent syntheses. They're not necessarily the core method Jesus himself modeled or commanded his followers to focus on.
So the methods we often rely on, like getting someone to make a specific decision, walk down an aisle, pray a certain prayer, he's saying maybe that's not the main point.
Exactly. He's questioning if those represent the finish line Jesus intended, or if they're even the primary starting mechanism for what Jesus commanded. It definitely challenges some deeply held ideas about what ministry success looks like.
Okay, so if he's critiquing that method, what does he say is the core command, the absolute instruction? He says it really simply, make disciples.
Right.
But that word can mean different things to different people. What does the author mean by it?
He keeps it incredibly straightforward. For him, in this context, disciples are simply learners.
Learners.
Yep. Learners. And he's very explicit. Jesus asks us to make learners. He specifically points out Jesus did not say make converts or make confirmants or church members or pastors or clergy. The focus is laser sharp. Make learners.
That distinction feels really critical, not converts first, but learners. So the command is make learners, and the context is as you go. How? What are the actual steps Jesus laid out for how to make these learners?
The author points to two clear, connected actions Jesus gave right there in the passage, baptizing them and teaching them obedience.
Okay, baptizing and teaching obedience. Let's take baptism first. Often we think of baptism as something that happens, after someone's a committed believer joining the church. What's the author's take on its role here?
He sees it differently, not just as an internal church thing. He views it as a really crucial, often early, public act. It's about identifying with Jesus.
Publicly.
Yes, publicly. A statement not just to your fellow believers, but crucially to the people you live and work and interact with every day, the people you're going among. He sees it as the start of helping someone identify as a learner of Jesus, not just a celebration much later. It's making that commitment visible.
Okay, so baptism is about public identification with Jesus.
Yeah.
Then the second step, teaching obedience. The author really stresses this one, saying it's vital but often overlooked. Why is teaching obedience so important for making disciples, in his view? And what's the difference he draws between just knowing what Jesus said and actually doing it? Use that analogy about knowing you should eat healthy.
Right, the healthy eating and exercise analogy. It hits home because we all know things we don't actually do. And the author's point is precisely that. The goal isn't just transferring information knowing about Jesus' commands. It's about life transformation through obeying them. He argues that teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you right at the center of the method is absolutely non-negotiable.
Obedience. Doesn't that word sometimes feel, a bit like legalism? Like just following rules?
That's a very common reaction, and he anticipates it. He argues that obeying Jesus' commands, when it's understood in the context of relationship and grace, isn't legalism at all. It actually leads to freedom.
Freedom? How?
He suggests that, quote, modern Christianity is soaked in a perverted view of obedience, meaning we've maybe turned it into burdensome rule following instead of seeing it as the pathway to the kind of life God actually designed for us. It makes you ask yourself, doesn't it? When you hear teaching obedience, what comes to mind? Restriction or freedom.
That's a really challenging thought.
Yeah.
Moving beyond just knowing to actually living it out. Okay, so Jesus gives the command, the method. But the author also highlights that Jesus didn't just leave him hanging. He promised resources.
Huge resources, unrestricted power, and constant presence.
How does the author connect these divine resources to the mission he's outlining?
This is so important because it ties into who can actually do this. The author emphasizes that Jesus wasn't banking on his followers being perfect or super skilled.
Right.
He points out that Jesus entrusted this whole mission, this organic process guided by the Spirit, to a group that, well, they weren't exactly flawless. The text itself says some worshipped, but some doubted.
He actually commissioned people who were still doubting.
Apparently so. He was comfortable commissioning confirmed doubters, as the author puts it.
Wow.
And the author sees this as profound. It shows the mission's success doesn't depend on our perfection, our credentials, or even our lack of doubt. It depends entirely on Jesus' promised presence and power.
Which are available to everyone who follows him.
To every follower. It shifts the reliance away from human ability and squarely onto God's provision. Takes the pressure off, in a way.
Okay, now this next part, this is where the author shares a really personal insight, right? He talks about his own kind of aha moment reading this passage.
Yeah, a real epiphany for him.
He realized Jesus wasn't just calling him to help people mature, grow spiritually in general, but specifically to make, disciple-making disciples.
Exactly, disciple-making disciples.
What does that concept of replication really mean here? Why is it so central for the author?
This is probably the absolute core of the chapter's argument for him. Replication is the engine. It's the built-in multiplication factor. The goal isn't just that one person becomes a learner, a disciple.
Right.
The goal is that the learner then naturally starts the process of helping other people become learners, who then also learn how to help others become learners.
So it's not just A makes B a disciple, it's A makes B a disciple who can then go and make C a disciple and so on.
Precisely. It's about passing it on. He even reflects on his own earlier efforts, saying his personal style, based on his own gifts, wasn't easily copied by the people he was discipling.
So it wasn't reproducible.
Right. But he realized Jesus' simple method, identify publicly through baptism, learn to live it out through obedience that is reproducible by anyone, anywhere, as they go.
And that changes everything about how you measure success.
Completely. The finish line isn't just when someone learns from you. The finish line, in this view, is when the people you're helping learn are actively helping others learn too, when your disciples are making disciples.
That is a fundamentally different metric. It shifts focus from just gathering people to multiplying influence. And this idea of who can reproduce this leads him to maybe his most controversial point.
Challenging who we think is able to do this work.
Yeah. He brings up Matthew 23, where Jesus warns about using certain titles. What's his provocative take on titles like pastor, elder, deacon?
Well, he argues pretty strongly here. He acknowledges these terms can describe real spiritual gifts or functions, like you see in Ephesians 4.
Sure. Gifts of the Spirit.
But he believes using them as fixed titles has often created an unintended consequence. It's built a kind of spiritual hierarchy, a dependency structure within the church.
A hierarchy, you mean like some people are the ministers and others are not?
Essentially, yes. He uses strong language like clergification. He even compares it to a caste system that divides believers. You have the professionals, the authorized ones who do the real ministry like disciple making, and then everyone else who are more like spectators or recipients.
Wow, caste system is strong.
It is. And his argument is that Jesus and even Paul mostly described what leaders do their function, their service, rather than setting up these fixed positions or stations that imply only certain people can or should do the core work of the mission.
So the issue isn't the function itself, like teaching or leading, but the title creating a sort of barrier or an unhealthy reliance.
That seems to be his core concern, that these titles, however well-intentioned, have inadvertently led us to depend on a small group of human leaders to be the primary disciple makers, instead of empowering and expecting every single believer to be involved, which he argues was Jesus' actual intent.
Okay, so if he's pushing back against dependency on human leaders and titles for this, where should the dependency be, according to him?
And this ties it all back together beautifully. He stresses that the true necessary dependency has to be on God himself.
Not on structures, programs, or leaders.
Exactly. Not on human systems or the expertise of individuals with titles. It circles right back to Jesus commissioning imperfect people, those doubters, and promising his power, his presence. The author's view is that the mission was designed to work organically, led by the Spirit, flowing through every single follower, no matter their qualifications, because the power source is divine.
Okay, let's try and wrap our heads around this. Chapter 2 of Spent Matches. It really pushes you, doesn't it? It forces a rethink of Jesus' last command. It's not just go somewhere specific, but be on mission as you go, just in your daily life. It's not primarily about complex programs or getting a decision, but about the ongoing process of making learners.
Learners who learn obedience.
Right. And maybe most challenging, it's not just about you making a learner, but about making learners who then make other learners. That replication piece.
Indeed. His insistence on that simple, reproducible method, baptism for identification, teaching obedience for transformation, and his critique of how our structures and titles might have accidentally gotten in the way of the organic, spirit-led multiplication. It's a powerful, maybe even disruptive way to read the Great Commission today.
It absolutely makes you stop and think about your own life, your own role. What does it mean for you listening? To be a disciple-making disciple. Right where you are, at work, in your neighborhood, with your family, as you go.
And it leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? If we actually simplified things, if we stripped back some of the complexity we've added and focused on what the author sees as Jesus' core command for every believer, could that unlock a more potent, maybe more viral kind of movement than our current strategies often produce?
A lot to chew on there. We've really just scratched the surface of Chapter 2 in this deep dive part of the Movement series.
Thanks for joining us on the Movement series. If today's conversation stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter as we continue walking through Spent Matches by Roy Moran. Until next time, keep leaning into the mission, because movements start when ordinary people say yes to an extraordinary God. To get connected and learn more, visit newgenerations.network.